Many are resigned to stay silent about the pain of being scammed, but Debby helps empower others by vulnerably communicating her experience and sharing specific warning signs to help others. Today's guest is Debby Montgomery Johnson. Debby is founder of The Woman Behind the Smile, Inc. She is a best-selling author, international speaker, entrepreneur, podcast host, former Air Force officer who served at the Pentagon and Defense Intelligence Agency, and is a woman on a mission. In her book, The Woman Behind the Smile, she shares her personal experience with a love that turned into betrayal and financial disaster. She removes the mask of shame and shows others how to do the same. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Pray Podcast. Debby, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray Podcast.
I am so excited to be here, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you because there's very few people that want to come forward and share their stories of how that they were a target for a scam. So can you give us a little bit of a background of who you are before this ever occurred?
Absolutely. This happened actually in 2010 to 2012. So we're going back a little bit of time. And at that moment, my husband had passed away suddenly. We'd been married for almost 26 years. I'd had a varied background with work. I had been an Air Force intelligence officer, imagery analyst. I'd been a senior bank manager for many, many years. And I actually was trained as a paralegal right after I got out of college. I had a bachelor's degree in political science. So I had a varied background, and I'm also a mom of four, grandmother of four. And that was my greatest accomplishment, I think, was the family. And it's interesting, they'll become a big part of my story going forward. But I had some really good training when I was younger. And after Lou died, I ended up running his business. I was basically thrown into running our company because he didn't have a follow-on plan for what would happen if he were to die. The follow-on plan was me. And I had to learn quite a lot relatively quickly because I did have a job working at a school district as a treasurer, again, working with money. But his company paid the bills. And I needed to figure out how to run his business. And I did that pretty effectively until all this fell apart.
So let's just jump right on into the story. Can you tell us your story and how it unfolded?
Sure. It started again like 10 years ago when my husband passed away suddenly. I was thrown into running his company, and I would work my business or my job in the morning. I'd come home after going swimming. I'd swim every afternoon to try to get control of what was going on, because when Lou died, he died suddenly. And like I said, I was thrown into running his company. I didn't know everything I needed to know. So I spent a lot of time looking into my resources, his clients, the customers, everybody figuring out what to do. With that, I was really working 20 hours a day. I had very little time to grieve. I'm one of those fix-it type people. With the four kids, I make things run. And I wanted to make sure that everything was working fine, and I was fine. And I say that now, looking back, that I really wasn't fine. I pretended to be fine. I pretended to be self-sufficient, and everybody thought I was doing okay. And until some friends of mine about 6 months after Lou died said, "You need a life." And they didn't mean a working life. They wanted me to get out and about. Well, Lou's company was an internet business, and so I was able to do it from my house. And I was really isolating myself once I left the school district because I was safe in my house. And so when they said, "You've got to get out," I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't party a lot. So I didn't see going out was an option for me. And that's when my friend said, "Try online dating. It's safe. You can do it from your house. You can, I used to say I would stalk people. I wasn't really stalking, but I could look to see what I liked." And I was 52 at the time, and I was looking for someone between 55 and 65. And I really didn't like what I saw, because a lot of the guys, if you know the wife beater t-shirts, they were showing up in the wife beater t-shirts and the motorcycles. Not that there's anything wrong with motorcycle, but it just wasn't my kind of a guy. And then when they started to write, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they can't write any better than a fifth grader. And so my husband had been very smart and very well read and very well written. And so the bar was pretty high. And when I stepped into online dating, I went into a faith-based site. It really doesn't matter which sites you go to, but I've just thought that might be safer, and that would have men that might relate to me. And I, again, was very particular. I put out a profile that was very transparent, very open. I talked about my family. I don't think I talked about my business. I did put that I was a widow, and I've learned a lot since this of what to put in a profile and what not to put in a profile. But anyway, I stepped into this very carefully. I like to say I dipped my toe into it. And I was actually, I was contacted by a couple of different people on a different website, and it might have been eHarmony or Match or one of the big ones. And I recognized that those weren't the kind of guys that I wanted to continue a friendship with or whatever. So I went back to the website, and I was contacted by a very good-looking young man. Young, I'm talking young. We're talking 55. And he was from England. He was international. He was a businessman. He looked athletic. He wrote very well. He was a widow. He had a son and a sister that were his sister and son lived in England because he traveled. And it was fun. And I liked the way he wrote, and I liked what he was saying in his emails to me. And that's how it started. It just started very carefully, cautiously on the faith-based site.
And so I'm kind of curious. In a lot of romance scams, the progression from, hi, it's nice to meet you, to, oh my gosh, I love you, let's get married, sometimes seems to be days. In a matter of days. It sounds like that took that process was longer in your experience.
It did, but I do recall what happens very quickly is they move you off of the dating site. And the way he did that was to take me onto Yahoo Chat. I knew nothing about Yahoo Chat back then, but he said because he was in Houston when we started this, and then he had just gotten a contract over in. He was moving hardwood trees from Malaysia to India. A side note there is that the business he was in of hardwood trees, I actually owned investment trees in Costa Rica. He didn't know that when the story started. But as he was describing to me what he did, and I Googled the company and all these things, I could kind of relate to what he was doing. So because he was moving from Houston overseas, he said, let's go into Yahoo Chat. I can get it anywhere. It's very easy. And it was like instant messaging. To me, it was amazing because I could hear that ding, ding, ding of Yahoo Chat in the middle of the night. And I would jump out of bed and I'd come in, and the way we communicated was mostly through writing. We could write for hours, and it was fun. So we progressed. It did go relatively quickly. I think there was one time I recall now when I was thinking, you're saying your feelings for me are really fast. It's coming very fast. And of course, I just lost my husband. And so I wasn't ready for someone to start telling me that they loved me right off the bat. But that was something I did notice, that he jumped in a little bit quick. And that's when they start calling you my darling, my wife at some point, my honey. I mean, all these words that they could really be talking to anybody. They don't have to remember your name when they say that. But he was just saying the right things and feeding my ego. And it's interesting. I did have a friend who was a social psychologist, social worker, that a few years after this happened, she was kind of digging deep into me, because I'm the kind that I didn't really bring my feelings out, especially when I was talking about this. And so she said, Deb, you appear to me to have withheld a lot of, your heart. I didn't like contention, so I didn't want to bring things up, and I would just stuff them. And she said, after a while, it sounds to me like you feel like you weren't listened to in your 26 years of marriage. And that's probably true. And so when I got into this relationship with, his name was Eric Cole, Dr. Eric Cole, Eric listened to me. And for 2 years, we wrote to each other. And I've got 4,000 pages of journal that chronicles this whole thing. And throughout that time, I would tell him about the kids. I'd tell him about how I was feeling. I was telling him about how I got mad after Lou died, because he left me alone. And so I could really express my feelings through this. And the blessing of this whole thing is that over those years, I filled up that hole that had not been listened to. Mm-hmm. And that was a blessing. And he was, like I said, he was very good at listening and to responding back. We had great dialogues in our emails.
It almost sounds like you learned how to express yourself more during this time.
I did. I did. And I could talk about anything. There were a few times when I got a little bothered. He was asking a lot of questions about my business, and he wanted me to help him write a business plan. And I was wondering, why in the world is he doing this? And then I think, well, maybe he's trying to, get into my company or something. And later on, I learned that he was really just learning business. He wanted to know how to do some sort of e-commerce business. And but we talked about everything from family to my parents to the kids to you name it, and his family. It was very interesting. I typed very quickly. And on Yahoo Chat, there was one time, actually multiple times, but one night in particular, I had an open chat with his son and sister, who I thought were in England, and then his attorney, who was somewhere in the world, and then he was in the Far East somewhere. And I'd be going back and forth between these three people. And I would be asking his sister and son questions to try to get to know him a little bit better. And then when his attorney got involved, it was amazing. Just I felt like there was this whole family being built. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting to be able to do that. I'd like to know how that was done now, but it was fun.
So at what point did things shift from just building a relationship to something a little more sinister?
Well, I never actually saw it being sinister because, again, I thought I'd never heard of an online scam prior to that, really. Mm-hmm. My mom had girlfriends who were in their 70s meet their mates. And so I never felt like there was anything sinister. There were a couple of times that I call them pink flags when they would have been read to some people, but when I looked into them and then asked him about things, about addresses or a package that got sent back to me after I was trying to send to his son a package, he always had a plausible answer. And it was only when he was supposed to get here for Christmas, and that was almost a month and a half, 2 months into it. And we had hotel rooms and all sorts of things for he and his family. When that got canceled, that was the first disappointment. But again, because he was an international businessman, he was doing business overseas, I understood some of the hangups that he had, the customs issues and the tariffs and those things. And so whenever I was asked to help him, it was more of a business proposition. Mm-hmm. And there was always the promise that he would pay me back. And I could understand sometimes in international business or in business period, you might not get paid until the job is finished.
Yeah.
And I understood that part, that he had to get through this and he had to get these things done. And the sooner he got the job done, the sooner he would get paid, the sooner he would come home to me. And that's where the energy is let's get this over with. And with every disappointment, it was like, okay, you're so far into it now, just keep going. It's this one last time. And at some point, when you're sending money, you get to, oh my gosh, I've sent him this much money. I can't stop now, because then I'll never get it back. So let's just do this one more time.
So speaking of money, where did the money start? I mean, often with these, it's, I think a lot of the ones that I hear, it's, oh, my child is sick, I need to go to the hospital. And, it's pulling on the heartstrings of a family member or something like that. But it sounds like in your case, that wasn't what was happening.
No, actually, it always starts with something like that. But the first time he had asked me for money, it was very small. It was a small amount. And it was really to get one of his friends onto the dating site. He was an engineer. He was overseas. He was having trouble. And Eric said, would you mind sending a check into the dating site? I'm like, no, not a problem. I said, more men, the better. That was my thinking. Silly me. But that gave that guy credibility in the dating site.
Yeah.
And so that was a small amount of money. After that, the next thing was a Western Union. And that by itself had me a little bit, because as a banker, I just never trusted Western Union. But we needed to do a power of attorney. Again, with my legal background, I knew exactly what that was. And I'm like, so why are we doing this? And he said, my attorney needs to set up this power of attorney so that when the money is sent to me or I've gotten it, then I can, send it to you. We can set up bank accounts and all these things in the States. And so that was the first little tip we had when I was setting up the power of attorney, or at least sending the money to Peter, his attorney, for the power of attorney. I was thinking, well, this is a little expensive. I mean, I could do power of attorney for about $15, and this was maybe $2,500. And so it started from there. And 2,500 went to 5,000. And then I went from off of Western Union to sending wires. And it was there's always urgency to the wire. We have to get it done now. And I think I just got caught up in it because I felt at some point there was this flip in our relationship where he was becoming my family or my future family. Mm-hmm. And I always say that now, even today, that I would do almost anything for my family. And because he was moving into that role, I wanted to help him because I wanted him to get here so that we could start the next chapter in our life together.
Mm-hmm. I know early on you had said after your husband had passed away, you kind of isolated yourself. Through this process, did he try to further isolate you from people?
Yes, he did. And it started with some of my friends. Again, I kept very quiet about what was going on, except for one of my girlfriends. And the more she pushed me on things, then she could feel me pushing her away. And she didn't want to lose my friendship, so she just zipped it at that point. My older boys, I have the 4 kids. I have 3 boys and a girl. And my older boys are military pilots. And at one point, I remember I flew out to see them, maybe in San Diego. And all I heard from the boys was, "Mom, don't. And at that point, I'm thinking, I'm the adult here. Leave me alone. So I really said to them, I don't really want to hear what you guys are saying. I will do what I want to do. When they said don't send money, I'm thinking, I'm not going to send them money. I probably already had. But they didn't need to know that. And so I stopped talking to the kids really about what happened. And it wasn't until one of them came to visit and he intercepted a Yahoo chat or an email or something and just came unglued. And so he ripped Eric apart. And I got mad at my son. I'm like, I didn't teach you to be that nasty and rude and everything else. And I made him leave the house and go for a walk. That was one of the first times I actually talked to Eric on the telephone because I was so upset the way my son treated him that we connected. We talked. And I did hear the British accent, which led into this, fed into the story. But I was just trying to explain to him how sorry I was that my son behaved so poorly. Well, fast forward, a year or two, and I was eating crow and apologizing to my son. But he really did. They do try to isolate you from friends and family so that you're only concentrating on them. And when I was talking to him in the middle of the night, my youngest son was 15, 16 at the time. He'd be sound asleep. And so Eric became my lifeline and my confidant. He was my it at that point. And it was very comfortable because I was safe in a relationship, but I didn't have to have anybody here in person. And after being married so long, I really wasn't ready to have a physical relationship, but I was ready to have someone that was he started off as a pen pal and a friend and a confidant. And this person I could talk to at any time in my day or night. And I felt comfortable talking to him almost about everything.
Did it seem... maybe this is more in retrospect. Did it seem unusual that he was so available?
No, because again, there's the time change. So I thought he was over in Malaysia. And at some point, it was middle of the night here. I mean, I could wake up at 3:00 in the morning thinking that maybe it's 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever, it'd be afternoon for him. So no, that really didn't play into it. And it was just there were times when we got disconnected. The service wasn't always so good. Mm-hmm. At least that's what he said. Because I wanted to Skype with him. We didn't have FaceTime and that kind of stuff back then. I wanted to be able to see him, and there was always a reason why he couldn't come online, and couldn't come on, so that I could see him. That bothered me a little bit. But I didn't know enough about Malaysia and Indonesia and all those areas to know maybe the internet wasn't so good over there.
So it was always I want to do a video chat, but I just can't because the service is just so poor here.
Yeah. And then I wanted to do it with his sister and son over in England. And the issue there was that their computer wasn't up to date enough.
Always a very reasonable, plausible sounding reason. Well, gee, I have an old laptop. It doesn't have a camera.
Absolutely. And I believed it. I had no reason not to trust that.
And I think 10 years ago, cameras on every device. I mean, nowadays I don't think you can buy a computer without a camera on it. Yeah. But 10 years ago, that was really not as common as it is now.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe the high end, maybe the high end stuff. But if someone's not techie, they're probably not buying those machines.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all told, at what point did the numbers and the dollars start going up?
As we got more into the finishing up of the contract, there were bigger issues, and a lot of them were tariffs, or they had something to do with moving these hardwood trees from Malaysia to India. And then it was, he was going to get paid, and then the money was being moved, and the money got held up, and we had to pay whatever it was to get the money out. I mean, looking back, it just seems so ridiculous. But when you're in the middle of it, there's such urgency, just like I said, to get this over with, to do whatever we could to get him through, to get it through Mexico, to get him out of India, to get, wherever it was. And there were large sums. I mean, it escalated up to 50,000, 100,000 at a time. And this is where I really want people to know is I didn't have that money sitting in the bank. I had a company, yes, but I sold my retirement accounts. Mm-hmm. I traded those out. I sold jewelry. I sold some of the trees that I owned. There were ways, because again, I felt like he was family. I wanted to make sure I could get him here, and I was going to do anything I could to get him here. And there was always that promise of, I'll pay you back. We'll be okay. I borrowed the 100,000 from my parents, which I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? But my parents even felt like he was part of the family. Mm-hmm. Yes, my dad at one point he's thinking, well, this sounds a little weird, but a year and a half in, he's thinking this couldn't possibly be a scam. This has been going on for way too long.
Yeah.
And so when we actually lost some money, that's my biggest regret was what happened to my parents. And I'm actually buying them a house next month to make amends for that, even though I paid them back year over years. But Eric was asking me to borrow from whoever I could. And that was tough. And I was a little bit embarrassed at some point because I was trying to get money back that I had lent to people. And when you lend money to friends, it's a gift. You're not going to get it back because they couldn't ever help me back. And I went to a couple of friends who were business people and said, hey, can you help me with my company? And because the company was going to help Eric. And fortunately, they said no. Mm-hmm. But Eric was always saying, do you know anybody else that can help you? Is there anybody that you can call that you can get the extra money and you can... Thank goodness it only was stopped with my parents. But over those 2 years, I gave him a lot of money. And
so do you mind saying how much the total was?
No, I don't mind. It was, and this is going to make everybody go, oh, it was actually $1,080,762.
Wow.
Exactly. And I didn't know it was that much until the end or towards the end when I actually sat down. I had phenomenal records. I kept incredible records and I added it all up. And when I saw that amount, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I am the traditional damn Yankee who doesn't give money away to anybody. And for me to have given him that much was unbelievable to me. And to even be able to find that amount of money, it was just, I still kind of go, oh.
As we probably rightly should.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I also realized too, and I learned this at a young age, we had a fire in our home when I was 15, that my last suit has no pockets and I can't take the money with me. It would be nice to have it in the bank now to be able to help children and grandchildren. But I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about how this whole thing happens. And I was even asked one time if I could reverse time and go back and not have this happen, would I do that? And honestly, I would let it happen the way it happened. Mm-hmm. Because again, I can't take the money with me. I am actually doing fine right now. I've remarried and doing okay. But there are so many people out there that need to hear this story. And I was interviewed once and a woman in Indiana said, Deb, if you believe in God, and I do, she said, this happened because God knew that you would speak up and you would tell the story. And at that point, I realized if I could just help one person either not get involved in this or recover from it, then it was worth the whole 2-year adventure and the $1 million. Because it's not about the money. It's about what I learned about myself and what I've learned about what is going on in the world and how to help somebody else. And that's my purpose, is to help one other person.
And that's very much the premise of the podcast is, this is a labor of love after hearing so many stories and all these different scams and all these different things going on, that was like, well, I'm in a position where I can afford to pay for the podcast production. I can afford to not run advertising. I have a business which can support this as I don't want to call it a nonprofit because it's not, but that I can support the costs of the podcast and the production and everything that involves around it, because I think I'm in the same position. I just don't want people to fall for these scams. And I think a lot of it is people just aren't aware of these things. A great example that I talked about was I used to work in a corporate office before I was self-employed, and we got this. I was kind of the person who got the correspondence from the building owner, and the building owner contacted us and said, "Hey." Over the course of the couple of years that we were there were two things that really stood out in my mind. There was one where they said, "Hey, if anyone comes in asking to inspect the fire system, don't let them in." I thought, that's just odd. Why would someone want to inspect the fire system? Well, not that someone would want to inspect the fire system, but how could that be a scam? Well, they would come in, have you sign a document saying that they inspected, and it really wasn't a document saying that they inspected. It was you were signing the authorization for them to charge you, $2,000 for the inspection or something like that. And because everyone just assumed, the building owner sent them in, sure, I'll sign the document and let them go on, when you were actually, hiring a company to come in and inspect when the building manager was already doing that and you didn't need to do it. The other one was, be careful about just people walking into your office when they're on the phone. They come in on a cell phone, very authoritative looking, and they head for a particular direction in the office. They walk down the aisle between the employees, and when no one's looking, they grab someone's purse or grab a laptop off of someone's computer and just walk out the door. Because they're acting like they belong there, like they know where they're going, they know what they're doing, so no one pays them any attention. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never have thought that sort of thing occurred. But these are the realities that we live in.
Well, what I want people to understand too is that when you hear of an online romance, you're thinking, that would never happen to me. And that's not the point, because it could happen to you, but it could happen to your mother. It could happen to your daughter. It could happen to your best friend, and you might not know that it's taking place. I mean, everybody gets scammed by somebody at some point in their lifetime. And I've heard 60% of the time it's by someone that you know or someone that's in your family. So it's just really important to be aware, because you might be at the perfect storm as far as emotions, the vulnerabilities. My husband had just passed away. Many of the women I work with, they're recently divorced. Or one gal out in Texas, she had worked her whole life. She was 67. She was retiring. She'd never been married. She was at a point where I've got money, I've got time. I really want a relationship. I want to travel. She had taken for $2.5 million.
Oh.
And we're friends because I understand what she went through. She understands what I went through. I was telling you earlier, the reason I do this is because, like today, I got an email from a doctor up in the Carolinas. Her story, she read my book. She goes, she goes, thank you for sharing your story. How I wish I had read it prior to going online to date. And she gave me her whole story. And it just sounds like it's the playbook. It's verbatim. The stories are the same, and the scammers are so well trained, and they swap stories with each other. They've got these playbooks. It's a business. It's a $1 billion business, and they are good at it. They're good salesmen. And I think we were talking that if these guys could do something for good, they'd be phenomenal. But they're good at just ripping your heartstrings out, and women and men, because Palm Beach County, the FBI told me more men get taken for $1 million than women. But they're broken at the end. They've lost everything, and they certainly don't need their family and friends to give them the victim blame.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part. And that's why most of the victims, or I call them survivors, why they don't speak up. Because too many people are saying, that was really stupid of you to do that. Why'd you do that? And in my case with the kids, I had to have the humble pie. I got yelled at by my boys, especially. And I realized at that point, my oldest son particularly, when his dad died, he was thrown into being the man of the house. Even though he was in flight school with the military, he was not here, but he took on that mantle of protecting mom. And after I let him blast me anew, I realized that he felt like he had let me down, that I hadn't trusted him and that he hadn't protected me. And I also felt like maybe the boys thought I was going to have to come live with them, which I didn't have to. But I needed to assure them that I did this. It was for me. It had nothing to do with them. And it was about my needing to feel heard and my needing to feel loved again because, their dad died suddenly. And anybody who's been married for more than a week realizes that marriage is not always easy and there are gives and takes. And Eric he just came into my life at the right time. And he knew how to manipulate that. Mm-hmm. And it's tough.
So what was the point where you realized, or someone else convinced you that it was a scam?
Oh, he made me realize, because he came on one morning, and it was September 10th, 2012. He came online and he asked me the question, how do you feel about forgiveness? We had talked about spiritual things many times over those 2 years. And when he asked me that question, I sat down and I put on my spiritual hat and we had this long discussion about forgiveness. And then we got disconnected, which again wasn't unusual, but he came back that afternoon and said, do you remember what we were talking about? And went on, and I said, sure. So I said, why are we talking about forgiveness? Have I done something? Thinking that it was me. And he said, no. He said, I have something to tell you. I have a confession to make. And I always say, I've heard that. I had heard that once in my marriage, and it was not a very fun time. And so when he said that, and he goes, this is going to hurt you, but I just need to know that you can forgive me. And I said, Eric, maybe you shouldn't be telling me this. He said, no, I have to tell you. So he came on, again, writing, and he said, I have to confess, this has all been a scam. And when I read that, on my screensaver, I'm seeing my handsome Eric, and I'm thinking, there's something wrong. You're sick. Because there had been medical issues over those 2 years. I said, something's wrong. And I said, now you have to prove to me that you're lying or that you're telling the truth. Prove to me that you're telling the truth and not lying. And so he said, on Yahoo Chat, there's a small camera. Well, I didn't know that. We'd been on Yahoo Chat for 2 years. So he walked me through how to bring up the camera. And honestly, I haven't used it since. And so when he came on live, I was looking at my screensaver of my handsome Brit, and online comes this picture. Actually, it's a live video of a young man with dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, and a huge smile on his face. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what has happened here? And that was the gift from God, that in an instant, my heart, my brain had just separated from those 2 years of story. And I actually had my telephone in my hand, and I took a picture of it on my screen. Mm-hmm. I do have a picture of him in my book. It is the only picture that I have of the real Joseph, not Eric. And I asked him why he did this, because most scammers don't confess, and they certainly don't come online. And he says that he had started to really fall for me, and that he couldn't do it anymore. And maybe that's part of the scam, but I have to believe that a little bit of my light overshadowed the darkness he'd been living in for a long time. And he just needed to do that. And I said, Eric, Joseph, whoever he was, I said, I need for you not to do this anymore. And I don't know that he would promise that. But then I said, why did you do it? Because I wanted to know. Mm-hmm. I said, Eric, you know me. I probably would have helped you out if you had been honest about what was going on. If you've got siblings that you're taking care of, which many of them do, many of them are taking care of family members. I said, I'm not a heartless person, obviously. I would have helped you. But I said, you've just completely destroyed my trust in people, and you've hurt my heart. You've hurt my bank account. And it was devastating to me. It was worse than when my husband died. Even though Lou died suddenly, and that obviously upended my life. But in this time, I was part of it. I willingly was part of it, and I gave him so much money. And that could have really destroyed me if I had let it. And so I kept him engaged I went to the FBI the next day with my mom and dad and all of my documentation. And when they said, well, first off, you were a victim and they manipulated you. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to be called a victim. And they said, we can't help you because he's out of the country. And when you hear the FBI say they can't help you, and I'm thinking, I watch TV. I know that they can do a lot of things.
I see it all the time.
I do. And they said, we can't. And that's when I just basically shut down. I shut down the story. I shut down telling anybody else. And that's why I named the title of my book was The Woman Behind the Smile. I just became that person that put on a smile and pretended everything was fine. And inside I was dying because now I lost my husband, and now I had lost who I thought was the next love in my life. And I lost a lot of money. And I was struggling with not being able to tell anybody. I didn't even tell my kids because I didn't want the, oh, Mom, that was really stupid of you. Or now what are you going to do? I didn't want that. I had a great relationship with my mother and dad, and I still do to this day. That's one of the benefits that came out of this is we've become very, very close. But it was a hard pill to swallow. And I don't know how I did it, but I actually started dating soon again after that.
So how did you make the transition from, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the woman behind the smile, I'm never going to tell anybody, I don't want anyone to see or hear what happened, to now coming on a podcast, and I'm not the only podcast you've been on, and you've been on national television telling your story. What was that transformation that happened?
I had gone to a business of speaking training. I belong to the Women's Prosperity Network. It's a women's organization in South Florida. I'd gone down to one of their business of speaking to learn more, how to better speak about my company, because it was actually Lou's company and I didn't know a whole lot about it. It's we manufacture a vitamin supplement for diabetics. He's diabetic. I wasn't. He was taking the vitamins. I wasn't. So I needed to learn how I could convincingly tell people about this great vitamin. And I was having lunch on the first day with a girlfriend, and she said something about online dating. And now she tells me that I rolled my eyes at her. And she goes, yeah, what's that all about? And so I told her the story very quietly. And she looked at me, and there was another woman at the table, and they were just riveted. And they're like, you have got to tell this story. And the one friend said, my mom was taken for $80,000 and she'll never tell. Another friend of mine came over and she said, Deb, I was in a relationship for a year with a man. We were engaged and he had another family up north. I started hearing all these stories, and they're like, you've got to move or change what you're talking about and come up with this story and how you can get it out in a bigger way. And by the end of that weekend, I presented the end of my story saying, I invite you all to the movie premiere of The Woman Behind the Smile. And they're going, how do we get tickets? And I'm like, I just made that up. They said, no, you've got to make this your mission, and you've got to write your book, and you've got to go out in a bigger way. Again, if you can only protect or save one person, then it was worth it. And it's turned into much more than that. And Valentine's Day is a huge time for love and online love. And that's when this first started hitting, was years ago around Valentine's Day, because the story came out originally in the Palm Beach Post. And people were they were incredulous. How could this happen? Well, then they start hearing that this was happening to a lot of people. And my mission really moved forward when, after the Palm Beach Post article, I was put in contact with an organization in Miami called SCARS, which is the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. They're an international nonprofit that has been for years working with victims and survivors around the world. And so I met with Dr. Tim McGinnis. Tim's the founder, and we became fast friends in our mission to help be a victim's advocate, because there's a lot of cybersecurity information and people out there, but very few, if any, except for us, work with the victims and their families in educating and trying to help them move forward. And once I got engaged in all of that, I just found my passion and my mission came, and my purpose in life came out of this really painful experience. And I get so ginned up, revved up, when I'm speaking about it. And I realized after one time when I was presenting actually at a Women's Prosperity Network thing, and a woman gave me what I call the stink eye. That was really dumb of you. And I'm thinking, first off, it wasn't very nice of me, because I started thinking something's going to happen to you one day, because it always does. There's that karma that returns to us. I'm like, I've got to make something good out of this. And once I started talking about it, I got the buy-in from people. I could see people bobbing their heads because they just needed to know that this had happened to somebody else and they weren't alone anymore.
Yeah.
And that's why I did it. And I realized I'm not talking to that woman that's giving me the stink eye. I'm talking to the 5 other women around her that understand that their mom went through it, their sister went through it, their friends going through it, and they don't know what to do. Who do they talk to about this? Because you don't want people to know that you're a smart business person and you got swindled out of $1 million. But it happens a lot.
I mean, I think that's even the genesis of the original, where the original Nigerian scam started. It was faxes sent to accountants, and these were highly educated financial planners and CPAs, and it was very well crafted.
That's come back around because last year, before we shut down for COVID, one of the biggest scams in the world was called BEC, which Business Email Compromise. And they were going right for the letter from the CEO to the CFO to the accounts payable. And it was usually like a Friday afternoon at 4:45, wire such and such a client right away. This is immediate and blah, blah, blah. And then you think, oh, I'm doing the boss, something important for the boss. And then you let him know that you sent the wire out. And he was like, wire for what? And it'd be 100,000, 200,000. It was scammers were making bigger money on one of those than they would make on 100 relationship scams.
Yep. I forget her name, but one of the women from Shark Tank, her company. Yeah, she was a real estate. Yes.
Oh, shoot, I'm having this brain cramp.
And so the whole,
Barbara Corcoran.
Yeah. So for her and her accountant, $100,000 here, $200,000 there. This was like normal operations. It was totally inside the normal course of their business. And it was just a fluke that they, the confirmation. Oh, yeah, I sent that. Wait, sent what? Huh? That it caught, and it was honestly incredibly fortunate for her that, maybe because of who she is or just the timing of it, the money didn't actually get transferred into the scammer's bank account. It hit somewhere else first, and they were able to stop the process and get the money back. But that's, totally the exception to the story.
Same thing happened to when Rick Scott was governor of Florida, and I live in Florida. His wife's company was taken for $600,000. But they were able to get it back. And that's the thing. I think if the head of Match Group or some of the dating sites, if their mother was taken, it would become a big issue. But it's not. They're not hearing about it. I actually spoke to someone up at the Senate Select Committee on Elder Abuse, and they're not hearing the numbers. If people reported it as much as it happens, I think we would be floored. The dollar amounts would be in the multi billions, but very few people report it. And so I don't think people really understand how pervasive the problem it is.
Yeah, I had done an interview with Kelly Paxton on embezzlement. And, from her discussions of talking with people that were, I don't want to say involved, victims who their companies were embezzled from, she was saying that somewhere 70 and 80% of those embezzlement never gets reported because it was a family member. They liked the person. They just wanted it to go away. Again, it's the owners of the businesses didn't want people to know that they had been taken. And so I just want to make it go away quietly and, send this person off to do it to someone else, unfortunately.
I could have done that. I could have just shut up and gone away. It would still be eating me up till this day if I had done that. But most of the people, the gal that wrote to me today, she said she told her kids, and her kids kind of pulled a Dr. Phil on her, where they came in and said, "Mom, look at this, this, and this," and that's valuable at some point. I really feel for the women. Typically, they're on TV that are being outed that way. It makes the family feel good, but it doesn't make the person that's being victimized really understand what's happening.
Yeah.
Because you can't understand it that way. I mean, you are so entrenched in this other person's life that it'd be like me coming to you and saying, your marriage is not for real. And I'm like, this was for as real to me as almost anything was in my life. And you either have to stop the person before they get really involved, or you have to wait till the end when they're broken. You can't pull them out of it in the middle. Yeah. And you think you can, but there's, like my girlfriend said, there was nothing I could do short of losing you as a friend that would have helped out any. And I said, you're true. You're right. You couldn't have said anything to me to convince me that Eric wasn't a real guy.
And if you lost her as a friend, that wouldn't have convinced you. You would as well. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Except now, bless her heart, she's separated from her husband, starting to do online dating. She moved right next door. I am her dating buddy. And I wish I had someone too that was objective, that could look at what I was doing, because she contacts me. She goes, you got to look at this. You got to look at this. I'm like, well, no, that's a scam right off the bat. I can feel it. I can see it. And she's like, no. And I've had several friends who have sent me pictures of people that they've been in contact with, and they're starting to fall for these guys. And I do that reverse Google search, or I do a picture search, and I can find these scammers in a minute. I'm like, stop. And I have one girlfriend, she'd lost her husband and she hadn't gotten any insurance money yet. And the scammer is waiting for you to get some money. And when I showed her that his picture had been used by 12 different profiles, she's like, well, it's the real guy, but his picture's been stolen. I'm like, of course it's a real guy, but that picture you're looking at is a guy that's had identity theft. It is not the person you're actually talking to. And that's the hardest part, is to convince the woman or man that the picture is not the real person.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a woman in the UK 2 weeks ago. She got really angry at me because she's convinced that there was this young fella. He's a former military sniper, Army sniper. He's, gotten out of the military, living at home with his family. She's convinced that the Army that he was putting on his social media that he was at home because he was really still overseas. And I'm thinking, I can't help this woman.
No.
She got mad. She reported me to Tim because she said, she's not helping me. And I'm like, I can't help her. She doesn't want me. She doesn't want to hear what I have to say. So she's not ready to be helped yet.
Yeah. One of my early interviews for the podcast was with Jeffrey Hazlett, who is a fairly well-known CEO. And he's one of those, I don't, let me age him down so I don't insult him by accident. He's, early 60s, gray hair, just salt and pepper hair, just a really good looking guy. And his likeness has been used in a ton of scams. And he is now at this point, like, getting contacted by friends and families of women and men who, hey, I know that you're not the person that my family member is dating, but they think they're dating you. Can you please talk with them and tell them that it isn't you? And like, he's done video chats with people, and they're like, the person is like, well, you're just lying to me to save face publicly, but you really do love me.
It's tough. I actually interviewed a fellow. His name is Brian Denny. Brian's a former Army colonel. Brian's likeness has been used by thousands of scammer profiles. It ruins his day. He goes, Deb, I can't tell you how many women I have broken up with. And he's happily married with a son in college. And he's got his own, he's going after Facebook and a lot. He and Kathy Waters have their own, going towards not the victim side, but more of the impersonation side. That's the one thing I like to tell my friends, like, if you're looking for online dating, you will not see a guy in military uniform or a girl that is going to be an online dating. I said, it just doesn't happen. I mean, I'm a former Air Force officer. My kids are active duty. And I'm like, the kids are not allowed to be doing that. And if they do, it's, they're private and they can't publish their pictures. I'm like, these scammers are not military. They are not. And that's, for me, that's stolen valor. And it just irks the heck out of me. But when I was talking with Tim about this, he said it's very effective, especially over in the Far East, in Malaysia and the Philippines, because they're looking for American soldiers to rescue them from where they are. Same here. It's not just the Malaysian women. The women I know that have gotten taken by guys in military, they're honest, trustworthy, they're patriotic, they're good-looking guys, and they look great in a uniform. But it's not them.
Well, it's that part of the scams is an appeal to authority. Whether it's I'm representing a government institution, or I'm a police officer, or I'm in military, it's that, it's just so ingrained in us to, I need to respect this person. I need to be supportive of them because they're an authority. It's just the way that we're wired.
And people that aren't in the military don't understand necessarily that they're not, our service guys are not going to ask you for a plane ticket home. They're not going to ask you to send money so they can take care of their kids. They're not. But I know that because I was in the service. Many people might not know that because they hear that they're not paid enough and all this kind of stuff, which is certainly true too. But because they don't know enough about the service and the services that are provided to our military, they're thinking, I want to help them. They're doing a good job. This guy's a doctor for the UN, or he's fighting in Syria against the Taliban. And I'm like, if we only knew that, what really got to me is when I understood the money that had been sent could possibly be funding Boko Haram or terrorism. I'm thinking, holy moly, I would never do that, And I'm not helping some young guy or some guy whose son is sick or daughter is sick. I'm funding terrorism. And I think that's really one of the reasons my boys became unglued, because they were coming up for security clearances. And they're like, Mom, I was like, guys, I wasn't given to a Nigerian, unknowingly. And I said, and I have security clearances higher than yours. I went to the FBI. If they want to come after anybody, they can come talk to me. I said, they're not going to come after you, but my boys, again, they were trying to protect, and I love them dearly. It changed our relationship, though, for the good, because it really made me treat my kids as adults and young adults. And they were, because I'm doing that to my parents right now. I'm in that middle generation now, where I'm talking to my parents as the adult in some of the financial decisions that are being made. And it's an interesting transition in family relations, especially when this happens, because a lot of people are afraid to tell their kids. And I said, that's the first group that you need to tell your family members, so that you can have some support by people that love you, but they have to understand exactly what's happened. And if need be, I send them my book and I'm like, read it and then give it to the kids, because they'll see it and they're like, well, that's not my mom, but it's somebody that it happened to. And then when mom starts to tell them the story, they're not blindsided, and they kind of have an idea that, somebody else that was fairly intelligent got taken too.
Yeah.
And it humanizes the situation rather than demonizes us as victims.
Yeah. So during this conversation, I was writing down all the warning signs that I could think of that you mentioned. But you also mentioned what not to put in a dating profile. So we'll come back to that. So the warning signs that I wrote down, and maybe if there's ones that I missed, let me know. You got quickly moved off the original platform. Quick feelings and pet names. Plausible excuses for why certain things can't happen. A canceled visit. The sending of untraceable funds via Western Union, because I don't know anyone who's ever used Western Union for anything except for fraudulent means.
They actually were sued. There was a class action suit, and I did get a little bit of money back from that.
$3.18.
No, actually, it was several thousand. But I had a friend who I think had done maybe 45,000 over the whole thing of her scam. And she was able to recover some of that.
That's good. I mean, so we have
when you find out Western Union, and I'm not bashing Western Union at all, but they're franchises, and some of these franchises very possibly were owned or run by scammers. That really irked me.
Yeah.
So be careful.
So we had the urgency, and anytime there was money involved, there was urgency. There was isolation, but it didn't sound so much. I think that sounded like it was more on your part than on his part.
He encouraged it because he didn't have people changing my mind.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have isolation.
Yeah.
And then we had the poor internet service, so you can't video chat.
That has actually changed. Some of the younger folks are being taken on Instagram videos, Snapchat, and those things, because the scammers actually can. Here's something interesting. When I was interviewing Colonel Denny, I was going to do it by video. And he said, Deb, I'm not going to do the interview with you if it's videoed. And I'm like, why? He'd be great. He's a good looking guy. He said, because scammers can change what I'm saying. I'm thinking, okay, we're done with that video. And that's true, because a lot of women will come to me and say, well, I video chatted with him. I said, well, have you been watching Netflix recently when you're watching a show and it's actually being done in Denmark and they're speaking in English? But if you really look at their lips, they're speaking Danish. They're not speaking English, but our brains are showing it, they're making us think that we're seeing them speak in English. I'm sure it's the same with the online, the way these scammers are changing. They're doing. We're hearing what we want to hear.
Yes.
not what they're actually saying.
Yeah, that
Be careful.
That was one of those things that, like, that was some original advice I'd always give people. It's like, if they were unwilling to do a video chat, then you know there's some that should be like the biggest red flag on the planet.
Yeah, until they say that they're not in an area where they can video chat. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq,
But like to me, it was like, well, if they're in Syria, Lebanon, or Iraq, then they're not available to be in a relationship.
Yeah, they want the ticket to come home.
But like, I think Brett was even talking about this, is with deep fakes now, if there's enough video of a person out there, it won't even look like it's dubbed. It will look legitimately consistent. So
yeah,
I'm still going to throw out poor internet service and won't video chat as a warning sign, but not to say just because they will video chat that is guaranteed that they're not a scammer.
I think a lot of it too might be the age groups, because the 50s and up, we're not doing Snapchat and all the things on the phone. We're looking for maybe a Skype or maybe a FaceTime. But the younger generation, the 20, 30 somethings that are being taken, they're the ones that are really relying on the technology on the phones to do those things. I think more so than the 50 somethings and up. So there are different age groups too that are getting taken in different ways. A whole nother discussion on that.
So did I miss any warning signs?
No, that's very good list.
Okay, so let's come back before we close. You talked about what not to put in an online dating profile.
Okay.
And I have one in my mind, but I think you're gonna say it, so I won't say it. So what should you not put in an online dating profile?
The first thing is that you're a widow or a divorcee, because I'm thinking if you're on a dating site, you ought to be single.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Now, it's very interesting, though, because when I was looking at widowed versus divorcees, I did feel that there was a difference in the men and the way they were going to be looking at a relationship if they had lost a wife or if they were divorced.
And there is good relationship science out there that indicates that people who have had a spouse pass away are more likely to build a new relationship more solid than someone who's been divorced.
Right. Although I remarried and my husband had been married for 28 years, but it was an amicable divorce. Yeah. If it had not been, that's when I saw the difference in the way the divorce guys related to me versus the widows. Mm-hmm. Scammers are always widows.
Yes.
Widowers. They're not divorced. They're always widowers, because that brings in that story with there could be a child involved in that kind of stuff. What not to put? Don't put that you own a company or that you're a business person, because they don't need to know about your finances. If they think that you've got some money, they're going to go after you. If they find out you don't have money, though, the next iteration of scam is that you become a money mule or a package mule. There's a whole other story wrapped around that. So you don't have to tell them about your finances. Be transparent, but just be careful when you're seeing those pictures. Do your due diligence on the pictures, because the pictures that we're getting of the very effective scammers they have really good pictures.
I mean, you mean that the person is particularly attractive, or is just a well-done photo? Particularly
attractive, good-looking guys. It's not the guys in the wife beater T-shirts. It's nothing against the wife beaters, but.
So it's almost like if somebody stands out significantly amongst the field of prospects, is that kind of a warning sign?
Yes, I would definitely check their pictures, that Google search. Because the guys the women I've been dealing with recently, they're very, very good looking men. And it turns out that they're models or that they're international guys. Their pictures are out there. Now, when I did the Google of my Eric's picture, I couldn't find it. Again, the scammers, though, are getting very creative, because with the Google search, if you flip the picture, it's not going to pick it up. There are ways for them to change the picture so that it's not going to get picked up. But just be really careful if it's really, really good looking. And I've got really good looking friends, but just be very careful that if it's a stage picture or a professional picture or a military picture, there's a good chance it's a scammer.
And then it's the person's in exotic locations doing exotic things.
Right. Yeah, we don't have too many doctors in the UN that are, working with the military over there and need a trip home. But most of them are international in some way. They're doing business internationally. They're not available here in the country, or they are in the country, but they've left. They're leaving. And that's what happened to me, is he was actually here in Houston and was leaving. Didn't happen that way, but it was a good story.
That's the story. Yeah. And that makes sense of why the calls happen at unusual times. It helps lay the groundwork for poor internet connection, hard to reach, can't video chat.
Here's another thing. I'm looking at this doctor's email to me. She said the way they're sending money today is through Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yes.
That wasn't around when I was doing it.
To me, the things to watch out, like that's what I classified as untraceable funds, whether it's Western Union, cryptocurrency, gift cards. I've even heard of like Fortnite credit, like credit on gaming platforms.
This happens a lot now on Words with Friends.
And people are meeting on, because people let their guard down. They're not viewing the person they're playing the game with as a potential, scammer. It's just the person they're playing Words with Friends with.
And that's happening. Like we were talking earlier about this pandemic. People are looking for friends. They're looking for someone to communicate with, to enjoy. And no one's thinking that it's a scammer. But it's just the picture. We would not go out and give $100,000 to a guy sitting on the street who we didn't know. But I gave $100,000 to a guy that I had fallen in love with online, and I never met him, never saw him until the very end. And it's not logical, but that's the thing. It's not. I always say my heart ruled my head.
Yeah.
My head got hijacked by my heart.
And that's what these guys are experts at doing.
They certainly are.
So what resources can you recommend to people who either think they're involved in one of these or think their relative is involved in one of these?
Well, I do want to say go to anyscam.com or againstscam.org. That's the websites for SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. I'll be transparent. I'm on the board of directors. I work directly with them. There's so much great information there for families, friends, tells you what kind of scams are out there, who to report it to. Report it to IC3, which is the FBI's website. They're not going to get your money back, but they're building their database. The first thing we tell people is to report it to the local police. Again, they're not going to do anything for you, but you can get an informational report. So go in there not looking for them to help you. Get an informational report that can, at least in the state of Florida, can help you get rent assistance or some sort of the government assistance. Because people that have been really taken in a big way, they've lost a lot of their finances. It's very possible they've lost their home. They've taken a mortgage out on their home. Talk to your bankers. They're not going to help you, and they're going to tell you that there's nothing they can do. But just report, and then put that behind you. The next thing I say is write your story down. You have to figure out a way to release the emotion of it. And for me, it was journaling. It was writing it out. It was writing my book. It was doing something. And then find somebody that you can really trust, a friend, a family member, someone that's not going to shame you, that's not going to blame you, that's just going to listen to what you had to say and then help you move forward, because you can't do it alone. And because if you try, you'll be isolating, and it leads to depression. It's led to many suicides, and it's sad. It's sad what it could do. But if you find that hope again, and I actually have fun. I have a Thursday show called Stand Up and Speak Up, and it gives people an opportunity to hear that we've all had something that we've hit rock bottom on, and with baby steps, you can find hope and you can move forward and have a successful life again. And a friend of mine I interviewed last week, she said, if you really think about it, all of us have made $1 million in our lifetime. May not be in the bank.
Yeah.
And we might have lost it, but over a lifetime, you've done it and you can do it again. So we have to get out of the victim mentality, the woe is me, and realize that there's energy in what we're doing, and just find the positive energy and find someone that you can really love again. That was the biggest thing, I think, with a lot of the women that I deal with that have shut their hearts off. And they're like, we'll never do this again. We'll never trust anybody again. We'll never fall in love again. And I'm thinking, that's true. If you think that, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, I started dating my husband. I had a couple of dates before him, but I started dating him in January, and the scam happened to me in September. I don't know how I did it, except I didn't want the scammers to get the best of me. And I told CJ right off the bat what had happened. And then he told me, about something in his lifetime, which was very vulnerable to him. I said, our deal is we tell the truth from the get-go. I said, I need an honest guy after being scammed after 2 years. I need someone that tells me the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it's honest. And we've been married 5 years, and he's the sweetest guy ever. And my greatest supporter, when I started coming out, he's like, oh, you're the husband of the woman behind the smile. And I said, but you're the good guy. You're the guy that everybody wants to clone now, because they want that hope that it could happen to them. And it can, if you just are really careful.
I think that is a great way to close out the episode. If people want to find you and your book, where can they find it, and what is it called? My
website is thewomanbehindthesmile.com. They can write to me at Debby, Debby, at thewomanbehindthesmile.com. Particularly if someone's been a victim, I encourage you to write to me. I will write right back and get you in touch with people that can help. The book's on Amazon, and it's called The Woman Behind the Smile, Triumph Over the Ultimate Online Dating Betrayal. We're coming out in Audible, maybe by December. And the Audible will have podcast messages in between the chapters. And I'm really excited about it because it's kind of a follow-on to what's happened since I wrote the book.
That's awesome.
And then my show on Thursday, Stand Up and Speak Up. You can find it on Facebook. And at The Woman Behind the Smile, just register to get the call-in information.
Great.
It's a really fun show. So thanks for asking.
You're welcome. We'll make sure that we link to all those resources and your site on the podcast. And we really appreciate having you come on.
Thanks, Chris. This has been great. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found this episode beneficial as a caution to others regarding romance scams, please share this episode with someone you know and leave a review at easyprey.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Debby Montgomery Johnson can be found at easyprey.com/49.